What is going on, everybody? Welcome to Off the Top Rope, Off the Mic Sports Network. So, in thinking about the aftermath of AEW Dynamite last night, and now seeing where we are, a few weeks away from Forbidden Door, I started to think about the main event scene. Um, let's really kind of focus here on the men's side. The women's, like I've talked about the women's division. The women's division's a fucking joke. And nobody's over. Like they're basically casting Alex Windsor as the new Jamie Hayter. Jamie Hayter's disappeared really since the match he had with Mercedes Moné. It's no different than what we were doing before All in Texas. I mean, they've elevated Athena a little bit, but I have no reason to believe that Athena is going to win the women's championship from Toni Storm at Forbidden Door. I have zero reason to believe that. They've made Athena look really stupid, by the way, in the last couple of weeks. She's had multiple opportunities to use her effective money in the bank privilege, only to just leave Toni Storm laying and say, yeah, I'm just gonna wait until London, at the end of the month here. And I was like, what are we doing? You should easily cash in. But let's talk about the men here, because I did a video almost a year to the day in September of 2024. This was after All Out, and this was All in London 2024, and then also All Out in Chicago. And I was thinking to myself, listen, okay, so what is the main event scene in AEW? Because basically what you had Jon Moxley, effectively reinserting himself into the picture. He became the world champion a month after I made that video. Him and Darby Allin were doing stuff. Hangman Adam Page had, just recently turned heel within the last couple of months. He beat, Swerve Strickland inside of a steel cage in one of the more graphic matches. You had Bryan Danielson was effectively going to retire. You had the Elite around, and they were kind of doing their weird thing. The Death Riders had really just started. And I was wondering to myself, what the fuck is this main event scene? Like I said, you really had Jon Moxley hadn't been champion. Bryan Danielson was still a champion at the time of when I did that video. And, here we are almost a calendar year since that. I think the AEW main event scene is worse than what it was a year ago, because whether it be through injuries, bad booking, politics backstage, this men's world title picture, main event picture is a fucking disaster, because Kenny Omega came back since that video. He's now off television again. I don't know if he's hurt, but he's not on television right now. Kyle Fletcher is now the TNT champion. If memory serves me right, I think Jack Perry was the TNT champion. Jack Perry literally hasn't been seen in almost a year, it feels like. I think he lost the title with Full Gear last year, and he's off television. The Young Bucks, in terms of tag team, the tag team division is probably in the worst state it's ever been. You've got all the drama surrounding the Hurt Syndicate. Bryan Danielson's retired. The one thing I will say, the guy who I thought should have been on top from the beginning was Hangman Adam Page. He's now on top, and he's doing a really good job as world champion. He's being protected and presented as a strong world champion. No nonsense. He doesn't like anybody. He's being, he's carrying himself like a world champion. I would have liked to have seen him more than what we saw from him, on the show on Wednesday. But, Will Ospreay, he's hurt. We don't know what's going on with him. Swerve Strickland, it looked like those two were going to be put in a tag team, which would have been interesting. Swerve Strickland's now facing Okada for the Unified Championship. And, Okada's finally starting to be presented like more of a big deal than he was, because he was kind of just middling around from the minute he got to AEW a year ago. And they were really just, twiddling their thumbs and really he had some good matches mixed in, but they really were wasting their time until Kenny Omega got back and they finally were able to do the Okada Omega match on American soil, and good for them. It was a fine match. It wasn't anything close to what they did in Japan, but hey, Tony Khan gets to put that notch on his belt, saying, hey, you put two of the greatest wrestlers ever on American soil in a decent enough match on, the biggest North American show that they've ever done. Cool. But you look at this men's division right now, whether it be through injuries, bad booking, or whatnot. Basically, what it comes down to is Hangman Adam Page coming out of All In Texas, one of the biggest and most emotional wins in company history, releasing the briefcase releasing the title from the briefcase in that epic Texas death match. They went back to the exact same match, didn't even have it main event, him and Jon Moxley. Jon Moxley and Darby Allin are now feuding with each other away from the world title picture. So those are two top names right there. The Death Riders are still around. Nobody gives a shit about them. And, Jay White's hurt again. And MJF, who is the longest reigning champion in the history of this company, and maybe the ace of this company, one of the best characters that they have, he needed to win a gauntlet to get a contract to be in position to challenge for the world championship again. And yet right now, what we're doing with him is we're basically, using that contract as a vehicle to get to the next championship. Look, if I'm MJF, I don't fucking need shit. Like, I'm MJF. I'm the best talent that they got in this place outside. Like, I love Hangman. MJF has always been their ace. And that's one thing that they have up on, like, some people in WWE don't think MJF's anything special. I think MJF's honestly one of the most entertaining people working in professional wrestling. But it's basically MJF and Mark Briscoe. And I love Mark Briscoe. I think Mark Briscoe gets a raw deal for a lot of what he does in his professional career because, obviously, he was cast in a tag team. Obviously, the unfortunate passing of his brother, Jay. And, he's kind of been a comedy act. But he's a really good professional wrestler. And he's very, very entertaining and good at what he does. But he hasn't been presented at the point where he should be main eventing multiple shows. So basically, you're building a storyline going into Forbidden Door. By the way, a show that should be about, hey, bringing in other promotions, and they haven't even bothered to do that. Forbidden Door, the build of it's kind of a mess. Will Ospreay's not there. We don't know when he's going to be healthy. Swerve Strickland, former world champion around this time last year. He's going after the unified title, and nobody believes that he's going to beat Okada after Okada just beat Omega. Kenny Omega's back in this company. He's off television again. Jack Perry, even though nobody gives a shit about him. There's nobody in this company that you can, honest to God, take seriously as a really big threat to Hangman Adam Page. Hangman, he got rid of, the Death Riders. So now, what are you left with? MJF, who literally won a contract that's effectively a Money in the Bank privilege, and we're already immediately going to him. They're already going to have another confrontation. They've had one match this year already. They're exhausting that. I mean, what? What are you going to do? Ricochet? Who gives a shit about Ricochet? That guy thinks he's bigger than he is, and he's an asshole. Nobody cares about Ricochet. Mark Briscoe? I love Mark Briscoe. That guy shouldn't be main eventing pay-per-views. Guy's a mid-card guy. He's very, very good at what he does. But he has not been presented at the level that he should, that people think, hey, I seriously believe that guy has a chance to beat Hangman Adam Page, who just won the world championship from Jon Moxley. Jon Moxley, by the way, is facing Kevin Knight and Speedball Mike Bailey. Like, this roster that should, like, you have Bobby Lashley on this roster. Say what you will about Bobby Lashley. That guy looks like a world champion. And they have done nothing to put that guy in position to be challenging for the world championship. There's people on this roster, they just don't position or book them very well, or they're injured. So it's funny that I did a video a year ago saying how much of a mess this main event scene was in AEW. And here we are, almost a calendar year later. You guys can go check it. I think it was like about September 14th or September 15th of 2024, where I said this division's a mess. It's an even bigger mess. It's an even bigger mess than it was a calendar year ago. Cope and Christian are about to get back together as a tag team. Cool. We started that storyline 2 years ago when Cope got to AEW. Nobody cares about these guys anymore. It really is amusing to me that, like, everybody tries to prop up that AEW is just doing so well, and yet you look at their main event scene where it was a year ago when it wasn't in very good shape there. The one thing they did right is they put the championship on the right guy in Hangman. But who does Hangman got to face right now? We're heading into Forbidden Door, and they're already going to run through probably the best opponent that they have for him. There's nobody else in this division, so they have to go to MJF. That's not good booking. And some of this is they've been dealt a bad hand, but also, you know what you can do to counteract against, injuries? You book a better show. So you guys all praise Tony Khan for being like this god and this gift and this beacon of light in AEW. I don't see it, man. This company has really faltered in the last couple of years, specifically in their main event scene. The women's division is also another entirely different issue. They've managed to destroy that shit in a year. They've got talented women there, but they also had a mess of a four-way that needs to be discussed about because that was bad. Really the only two people who really anybody give a shit about is Mercedes Moné and Toni Storm. And do we really care about Mercedes Moné when she's more she doesn't really care about AEW and she's carrying around a bunch of championships that nobody gives a shit about it? No. This company really needs a reset, and they need to have an honest discussion with the people backstage and the people and they've got to get their heads right, because we could be sitting here doing this conversation in another year. Who else is they're going to be? Because Swerve, I think Swerve's great, but you might have to turn him heel, and he's over. And you just had him resolve his differences with Hangman, so you kind of booked yourself into a corner there. Okada's got one of the 97 championships. You've got talented people like Hobbs and Samoa Joe and, some of these other people, Wardlow, who can't get on television. They can't get booked. There's nobody credible that can be presented as a top-level guy to, be in the world championship picture. And that's a reflection of just how badly booked this company is. And they've been snake-bitten by injuries. It sucks what happened to Will Ospreay. But you know what could have prevented that from happening? Is if you actually had more credible and interesting characters at the top of your men's division, and they don't right now. They don't. It's amazing. I had this discussion a year ago, and I think AEW is in a worse position than they were before. Anyway, thanks so much for watching. I'll see you guys soon. Bye-bye.